Here we go. Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now from texasfootball.com and Dave Campbell's Texas Football is the managing editor, Travis Stewart. How you doing, Travis?
I'm good. How are you, bud?
Doing well. Thanks for coming on with us, as always. Saw some interesting things on your website this week. One talking about the reasons why Baylor, Texas, and TCU are having down seasons has to do with what you called, or what Jake Shaw called, non-graduating attrition. Explain that.
Well, non-graduating attrition usually means guys that are lost to reasons obviously besides graduation. So if you lose guys to injuries, which has been particularly problematic for TCU at key spots like linebacker and defensive end and running back in some cases. You can also lose it to things like, well, off-field issues, which has, again, been an issue for TCU as well. Obviously, we know what happened to them in the preseason when they ran into some drug-related issues for several students, and then they lost Casey Paha as well. And you can also have kids just leave the program, for a variety of reasons. That's actually happened, what it feels like, to Texas a lot, where guys decided either, hey, I'm going to transfer because I'm just not getting any playing time here, or I'm going to transfer because it's not playing out. I mean, if we remember Dan Buckner, who was at Texas once upon a time, was a big slot guy for them, and you could play him out wide a little bit, but mainly just a big slot, and was a great player for them early on. Ended up transferring because he got in some hiccups off the field and went to go play, I think, at Arizona. Well, those kind of things, over the course of 3-4 years, those kind of things can really eat away at a program's depth. And, in some cases like TCU, some of it's not preventable, like injuries. That's just a part of the game. Some of it is, like keeping your kids' heads on straight. But when you lose primary guys or even just half of your class over 2-3 classes in a row, it's really going to affect your ability not just to play throughout a 4-quarter game when you just don't have a lot of healthy bodies run out there, but in some ways it also cuts down on your options. If you've only got 2 or 3 safeties left on the roster, and you're looking at it and say, well, I don't really like any of these guys, well, it's not like you have a 4th or a 5th one to go to. In that case, they're just a walk-on. So when those kind of things hit you, that's hard.
You mentioned guys like that. In Texas, Traylon Shedd from Cayuga is one that comes to mind. This is a kid that was one of the top running backs in the state a couple of years ago, goes to Texas, gets lost in the shuffle there. He was the king of the hill on low classification in high school, but just couldn't bust through at UT. And
now he's going to go to SMU, and just like Garrett Gilbert did. And so when you look at some of Texas's classes, some of the biggest name guys they had, like Garrett and like Traylon Shedd, were non-graduation attrition guys. They ended up going elsewhere. And, when 2 or 3 or 4 of your biggest name guys over a 3-4 year period don't even produce anything for your program, like Traylon never did for Texas, which, I don't begrudge the kid for it or anything.
Sure.
That's just the way it played out. Garrett Gilbert had his time there, but it didn't work out either. But when you're big name guys that you put a lot of effort into recruiting and bringing them in, if they don't hit, it's going to make it pretty difficult. That's why part of the reason why recruiting can be so important for schools, because when you're putting a lot of time and effort into picking guys over other guys, the old story was always that Texas passed on Andrew Luck because they were very enamored with Garrett Gilbert at a young age, and they wanted to make sure that the depth chart was clear for him. That's rumor, and I don't know how accurate that is, but that illustrates the point that a lot of times you put effort and time into one kid, and if it doesn't work out, it's a double loss.
Well, and then there's also the issue of evaluation of talent. Is that a problem, do you think, with a program like Texas, where they signed a bunch of kids that were highly ranked according to the recruiting services, but maybe just weren't all that good? That's probably part of the problem. Whenever a team is struggling with as many natural advantages and still struggling as Texas is, there's rarely one thing that's wrong. I'm sure player evaluation is part of it, but, these are kids that we here at Dave Campbell's Texas Football rank highly as well, right alongside the same guys that A&M has signed and Texas Tech has signed and sometimes TCU has signed, right, and Baylor as of late, right next to those guys in the rankings. And those guys going to the other programs have largely panned out fairly well. It's the ones that are going to Texas that have not, which in some ways would imply another aspect of recruiting, which is player development, maybe a bigger issue than player evaluation. Not coaching them up.
Yeah, they're kissing cousins, but they are different. And if you can take a 5-star guy, and if you're putting him in the wrong system or he's just not getting the right kind of coaching, he may not produce. For all we know, Garrett Gilbert may have gone to, just pick a random school. Garrett Gilbert could have gone to A&M and been an All-American. It doesn't look likely, but that could have been the case. He also could have sent Christian Michael to Texas, and maybe, he wouldn't have gotten hurt, and maybe he would have been a 2,000-yard rusher 2 years in a row. You can never work your way back so clearly, but all I can say is when we have all the guys on the line, and Texas is picking a lot of the same kids that A&M is, and they're not working out for Texas, and they're working at schools like A&M, TCU, Baylor, and Tech, it's hard to look over coaching there.
One other issue there, Travis, it looks like the margin for error is a lot smaller because of several things. You mentioned the number of schools now that are in the recruiting battle with these guys like Texas, but also because you know that if a kid is good, chances of him being there through his senior year are very, very slim. So you're not going to get the full 4 years out of most of these kids if they are that good. And so you find yourself in a situation where you've almost got to hit on these guys almost 100% to be able to reload, so to speak, these days.
And that's just part of the parity of college football now, where you can miss on a couple classes, which I still say was a primary root of the issue when Texas really bottomed out 2 years ago, was if you go back and look at their 6, 7, and 8 classes, and 5 for that matter, 2005, 2006, 7, and 8, a lot of those guys didn't pan out. And then when obviously things got rock bottom around 2009, I mean, that's when there obviously became a clear issue, and now you have to rebuild from there. And I mean, as you aptly said, with so many schools out there who can compete for kids, and sometimes you just get unlucky. I've had people tell me, "Oh, well, everyone offered Garrett Gilbert." I'm not trying to pick on him. He's kind of at the center of for Texas right now in some instances, but everyone offered him a scholarship, and he could have gone anywhere, and he would have been the same anywhere. I mean, I don't know if that's the case or not, but yes, in that case, Texas got lucky by being the one that won the Garrett Gilbert sweepstakes, and then they became the unlucky one because they didn't play out. So that's just college football for you in the recruiting world right now. That's why it's such an intense genre of the sport. Okay,
looking at the Big 12 right now, we saw Kansas State and Texas Tech last week, and what did we learn from that ball game? Kansas State's just that much better, or just Tech had a bad day and wasn't as good, just not even in the same neighborhood? What did we learn?
Well, I mean, I think Tech, obviously, they played a pretty good first half, and Kansas State really stretched its legs out in the second half. And I think what we learned was more that Kansas State was just the best team in the conference, right? At least as of right now. I mean, anything can change in this last month or so. But when I watched that game, I thought, yes, Kansas State looks like the best overall, most balanced team. I have not always thought that. When UNT, gave Kansas State a heck of a run earlier on the season, I thought, this will be the 7-5 Kansas State team that I thought we would see all year. And since then, I mean, K-State's really blossomed from that point. Their defense is playing very, very well. Colin Klein's playing very well. The ground game can produce more than enough to keep the team respectable. Now the question becomes, well, in the Manhattan locker rooms, it's just going to be win the next game. Now the question for pundits like myself becomes, let's say Kansas State runs the table and goes undefeated. But you also have maybe Alabama goes undefeated, Notre Dame goes undefeated. Will that be enough for K-State to get to the title game? And I'm already thinking, as much as I wish Kansas State would be able to go, I don't think it would. If someone like Alabama and Notre Dame went undefeated, I don't know if there's anything that K-State could do that would manage to or find a way to push them through that top two. And Oregon looks like they could end up in the same boat as well, undefeated, and may not make it. So while the Kansas State players are only going to be looking at the next week, I have to confess I already look ahead, and I wonder if the future is going to end up bleak for them no matter what they do.
Well, and you pointed that out, but I'll tell you one of the biggest problems they've got is that Notre Dame went out there and beat up a good Oklahoma team. Did you see that coming?
I didn't see that one that badly, and I will say that Kansas State beat Oklahoma, I thought, pretty solidly as well, but I did not see that margin coming. I would not have been surprised if Notre Dame beat Oklahoma, period, but the way they did was surprising to me. But like you and I said last week, Oklahoma, its two biggest victories in the days that looked the best were against Texas, which is obviously its heated rival, and no one can argue that is always the best football Oklahoma plays almost every year. They come out so fired up for that game. The other biggest win they had was against Texas Tech, a team they were very upset with after they lost to Texas Tech somehow last season. So when Oklahoma was motivated, they came out and played great football. And I'm not saying they weren't motivated against Notre Dame. That's ridiculous. But they were missing I just didn't see quite the same level of angry ferocity against Notre Dame and the urge to physically dominate that I saw when Oklahoma played Tech in Texas. It was just a different feel, I think, all the way around for me.
It looks like Oklahoma, as the rest of the conference, has a really difficult time playing against a team that does a really good job of smash-mouth football other than K-State.
Well, and probably that's because they just don't see a lot of teams like that in conference. And Oklahoma was the only team in the conference that I felt really went out and scheduled a tough non-conference game. That obviously has been the Notre Dame game we just passed. Everyone else played really just a bunch of cupcakes and a couple of mid-level teams in there. But when you go out and you play a bunch of cupcakes in non-con, then you see a bunch of spread, hurry-up teams in conference play, when all of a sudden you're faced with a totally different style that you may not have seen before or ever in some cases, because keep in mind a lot of these high school kids grew up playing in and against the spread, so they may not even be that familiar with get your knuckles down in the dirt and get dirty offenses. It's going to be a big adjustment. And, Notre Dame, obviously, since they played so many teams from all over the country, they see so many different styles. I don't want to say they're going to be ready for anything. I don't want to coordinate Notre Dame as some great shape-shifting football team that can beat anybody, but they're going to be familiar with a lot more styles, and in some cases, some of the Big 12 teams, they have known and learned how to defend one thing for some time now.
All right, where are you guys going to be this week?
We're going to dive into the Golden Triangle, which I'm actually excited about. We're going to Beaumont for Port Memorial Beaumont Westbrook, and the storyline there is you've got the Memorial team that's cruising. They're going to make the playoffs. They just need one win in their last two to get in, or just another team can lose. That would work for them as well. Whereas Westbrook has to win out, and this is going to be this is Custer's last stand, essentially. If they lose here, they're out of it, and if they win, they can live to fight another week. So I expect we'll see the most desperate and best prepared Westbrook team that anyone's seen all season.
Good football down there, too, no question.
Yep, always is. It's not been a great year for top-end recruits, actually. There just hasn't been a lot of guys that have galvanized all the recruiters' attentions, but it has been a great year for football. Portsmouth Memorial's been very good. Needleland's been very good, and West Orange Stark, get this. So West Orange Stark is 8 games into the season, and they've only allowed 20 total points. That's unbelievable. Wow. 20 total points in 8 games.
That is unbelievable. Well, we're looking forward to talking to you next week because there's a hope that we may have two 9-0 teams and John Tyler and Whitehouse colliding next Friday night. So we'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that next week.
I bet you they will be 9-0, and I'll be happy to talk about it.
Okay, good deal. Travis Stewart from Dave Campbell's Texas Football on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.